Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Okay, welcome to this breakout session. I'm Chung, Taoist priest. I think a few of you asked me why am I dressed like this today. Yeah? Okay, past few days you may see me in my Taoist robe. So basically, I share with them that faith is something that's within us. It's not about what we wear. Yeah, I can be dressed in my robe, but I can be still a priest, practicing priest in any attire. Okay, no matter you see me in t-shirt and jeans, although I rarely wear jeans. Okay. This is my identity, my religious, my faith that is within us. Okay, so before, I'm very privileged, to be the moderator for this session, and with two very distinguished speakers. Okay, one is a very long friend, many years. Okay, and in fact, we actually met last week over coffee in Singapore. This is the case where many of us actually meet over simple meals together to catch up and also to discuss. So, without further ado, we'd like to invite our first speaker, Dr. Mohammad Hannan Hassan, the Deputy Mufti of the Islamic Religious Council of Singapore, Muis. Dr. Hannan, please.
Thank you very much. Last week, I was attending an event at the National University of Singapore when I met an old friend. And I walked in at the event dressed very casually, the Hannan's way. Short sleeve, tug out, jacket just to cover up the short sleeve. And then he was the organizer, and he observed me, and then he texted me this because we respect the Chatham House, we are not attributing to anyone, right? So he texted me and said, Deputy Mufti without songkok. Songkok is the Malay, the Muslims, you always put on the songkok. If you observe Mufti, like our brother there, with the songkok. And I was dressing very casually. So he texted me and said, Deputy Mufti without songkok, standards are slipping these days. Jokingly, obviously, he had a smile joking there. And I laughed, and then I responded to him. I said, I'm setting new standards, where focus is on content, not forms. But truly, COVID is all about substance and content instead of the form. And if there's one lesson that we go out from this experience, it's really the focus on substance and the principles rather than forms and rituals. The rituals can and ought to change depending on the situation and context, which during the COVID, many of the rituals have been revised and adapted. But the principles remain. So if there's one lesson that we go out from this COVID, this pandemic, is really the focus on what matters most in religion, what are the matter of principles, and then post-COVID, because we do not want to go back to pre-COVID, where this pre-obsession of the forms and rituals, and we lose sight of the principles of what matters most in life. So with that note, I thought, I'll very briefly, just want to state my argument. Basically, it's like a thesis statement to my talk, my sharing today. And we'll give you a couple of examples. And then, again, I've mentioned earlier, what are these matter of principles for us to go out from? And then some practical lessons we learned from COVID. Let me state by saying religions and religious traditions have survived to this day because they remain principle-centered, they remain nimble and resilient. They have always been adaptive, and therefore they become resilient. And when religion and religious traditions lose their relevance, they will disappear by the law of nature. Without any conspiracy theory, without any politics, they will just lose out, burnt and evaporated. So therefore, protecting and safeguarding religious traditions do not mean keeping their letters, but instead their spirit and the higher purpose. And we continue to reinvent traditions. If there's one statement I want to make, and if there's one statement that we all want to remember after this, you don't remember that 10 minutes, you probably remember that 30 seconds. I hope that you will remember this. Let me just give some examples. 2 examples, if I may quote, with your permission. One is the Postgraduate Certificate in Contemporary Islam in Contemporary Societies, PCICS, a program I head. I'm also the head of the program. It's a postgraduate program. Let me just give a context to this. All our religious teachers, our imams, or what in Singapore we call asatiza, ustaz or asatiza, all of them must be registered. Right, Mr. Taufik? Our ustaz. He must be registered. Else, he cannot deliver a sermon, he cannot function as a certified ustaz. Yeah? They must all register under what we call the Asatiza Recognition Scheme, ARS. So currently we have close to 5,000 Asatiza under this scheme, ARS. But obviously with different tiers, the graduates among them will be half of them, about 2,005, close to 3,000. Now, all our Asatizas receive training, religious education outside Singapore because we do not have an Islamic university yet. Inshallah soon. So we do not have an Islamic university. There are 10 madrasas, that 12 years, high school, then they move out to other countries to attend Islamic universities. So they get all the religious training overseas. They come back to Singapore. They will function here in Singapore. But we need to help them contextualize because the context is different here from Europe, from Azhar, from Cairo, and so on and so forth. So in short, as part of the requirement since 2020, these returning asatizas will need to attend a 1-year postgraduate program called PCICS. Something similar to a lawyer. Having passed your LLB, you need to sit for your bar, pass it, an engineer, and so on and so forth. So they have to attend this 1-year program, PCICS. Obviously, it is very tough for them. They say that another year, you don't trust me, in the Singlish way. Tak percaya, do you not trust us? Do you not trust Azhar? Do you not trust Jordan and all these big universities, Medina, and so on and so forth? No, we are not saying that, but this is really to help them contextualize, right? So we introduced this PCSS program, obviously with great hesitation on the part of this returning asatiza. So we needed to really convince them. The inaugural program was in April. It was supposed to commence mid-April, 2020. Then came COVID. COVID struck. It's not that. We introduced what we call here in Singapore CB, circuit breaker. We do not use the term lockdown. We use the term circuit breaker, CB. So CB was announced, and it started, I think, first week or close to second week of April. That was just a week before PCICS. You can't imagine the stress and anxieties on our part. We have made all preparations for more than a year. And then CB was announced, and we had to go full online. And you can imagine these participants who started with great hesitation, and then you have all this thing. So I had to postpone for a week in order to make the adjustment. To make sure that we do not lose them. And my team and I, okay, let's say just my team, worked day and night, 24/7, rework on the curriculum, design it, and prepare online materials to teach them. It was tough. It was very difficult. Yeah. So I want to share this is not a marketing. I've got no reason to promote and market this to you because you are not really the participants. But just really to share what they think about this PCICS. Yeah.
The PCICS program endeavors to prepare asatiza for their roles as role models, professionals, and religious leaders in contemporary society. With COVID-19, our PCICS cohort has been given the opportunity to adapt. And adapt they did. Here's a peek into how everyone is adapting to these changes.
It was really challenging at first to complete assignments and attend online lectures, miss working from home, juggling all these. Yeah, it was quite tough. And also sadly little time for family bonding. But the thing is, alhamdulillah, skills taught by our lecturers and tutors were really useful. Like for example, speed reading and dividing of workloads, materials. So this really helps in reducing reading time, and it somehow allowed me to submit my assignments punctually, alhamdulillah.
We actually create a WhatsApp group where we give constant reminders on the submission deadlines, discussions, and the segregation of the work tasks so that we can share the workload together. And I am still juggling between work and study, but looking at how the PCICS team have put in effort in structuring the curriculum, the modules, the lessons, as well as the tutorials, I feel like I should also put in my best effort.
Since its conception, PCICS had always been developed with blended learning in mind. This means that the students will not only learn during their face-to-face lessons, but also via various online learning tools as well. When the circuit breaker measures were announced earlier this year, this further deepened the use of technology in our classes. The team was quick to adapt, and adjustments were made to move all lessons online for home-based learning. All this while still ensuring that the pedagogy is not compromised and the experience remains student-centered.
At first I was quite anxious as to how I can conduct online teaching. So we had to rethink how we can teach and support the students better in terms of their learning journey. Whenever I posed a question, the students typed their answers in the chat function. It allowed more students to participate, and I think this accords with our role to provide a safe harbor to our students to express their thoughts and help them grow.
I think the course has taught me the importance of context and relevance in applying Islam in Singapore. This course is teaching me on how to actually apply all this into the Singapore's context. And also apart from that, I am being given a better understanding of our social world and why is it important to understand it to actually understand the communities and societies needs better.
Ask a teaser of the future, coping with real-world changes together.
That's one example, the PCICS. My next example is the mosque, which is another big, difficult institution to manage. I remember the day in a meeting we were discussing about safe measures in the mosque. And I remember vividly that I came to the meeting with the intention to protect, to make sure that we continue to provide physical services, rituals in the mosque. So I was discussing with a friend, see how can we convince the rest to make that decision. While at the meeting, we received feedback, inputs, what's happening out there. It was in the meeting, text coming in, hey, this is happening there, this and that mosque, this group returning, if you Singaporeans will remember that there was a group returning from KL, from the big Tabligh congregation, and then they started to go to different mosques. And at that point, at juncture, I changed my mind, together with colleagues, we had to make that difficult decision, that the mosques need to be closed. And I think, I recall correctly, we were among the first that we know in the world, in many countries, that announced the closure of the mosque. It wasn't easy. The first thing I did when I returned home, before going back to my going home, I met my father, because my father, mosque is rather his first home rather than our home. So I needed to go to him and assure him, explain to him what has happened, and assure him, and then I bought for him an iPad. So these were difficult times, but these were also opportunities for us to relook into some of our religious thinking. And alhamdulillah, during that period of 2 years, the Fatwa Committee has made decisions more than a decade. I mean, usually we don't really issue fatwas every year. No, every probably 1, 2, 5. But during that period, we issued dozens of fatwas. We had to make quick adaptation and make quick decisions. We closed the mosque. We introduced the mosque booking system until now. Obviously, there are plenty of lessons. We go online. And then we also introduced what we call the Salaam movement. And this is really about how do we keep this spirit and really learn from COVID. So we have this Salaam movement, and you can, this is a promotion. Go and check out for Salaam movement, YouTube channels. You will find Mufti and us and all the others that are contributing. So then we introduced the Salaam movement, and what is very interesting, this is really a framework developed by our mosque friends, and Mr. Taufik is a staff in the mosque. He should know that we have introduced what we call creating a virtual faith space in addition to the traditional physical space. And in between, these are all initiatives to ensure that we keep the religious life. Albeit the form may differ, may vary from the past, but we must keep the spirit. Yeah. So how then do we ensure a virtual faith space in addition to the physical space? So we came up with this plan, and this was last week. There was a mosque summit to share with mosque congregants about some of this plan. These are some of the quick adaptations that we make. Yeah, so let me move to the third point. I'm running out of time here. Then really the focus on substance and content rather than the forms. Focus on what matters in religious life rather than the rituals and the forms. I'm not saying that the prayers, the rituals are not important. I'm not saying that the robe is not important. Sometimes we also need to put on the robe, yeah, because these are symbols that we also need to keep. But we must not lose sight of what matters most. And we must not lose the forest for the trees. This has been the message that we keep saying to our community. So now what are these principles? Firstly, humanity. At the center of this is humanity. And in fact, as we talk about religiosity, as my teacher used to say, Pastor Mustafa Sharik, who will be speaking tomorrow on Saturday, that you cannot possibly think of a religion without human being. If humans do not exist, there wouldn't be any religion. So the protection, while in what we say, the Maqas Isha, the 5 Maqas that our Muslim friends know here, the protection of life, meaning human. But you cannot possibly protect life without protecting, you cannot protect deen, the religion, without protecting humanity. So at the essence, at the center of what we do must be humanity. And then religiosity, these are the two sides of the same coin, that you cannot imagine one without the other. So focus on humanity, then the principles and main values of religiosity. And these are some of during COVID, some of the principles that we really hold dear to, the principles of la darar wa la dirar, non-maleficence, do not cause any harm, which is key. So it's not just about putting on the mask. It's no big deal. It's just putting on the mask. Okay, alhamdulillah, we are not putting mask today. Right? But fundamentally, it's about protecting lives. That's the forest. Not just the tree with mask or without mask and so on and so forth. We had to close the mosque, suspend Friday prayers. And when we returned back to the mosque, we could not stand side by side, shoulder to shoulder as we usually do. It's 1 meter safe distancing. And it wasn't easy. For some, that is really, that is a big thing. But we survived. We learned in the process. So the focus on the avoidance of harm and then the protection of life. Now, what are some of the lessons that we learned? Some of these practical lessons. I thought trust building is key. And this we need to do in times of peace, like now. This is where we invest invest all this trust into the emotional bank account, because we really need them in times of crisis. And we observed this, alhamdulillah, during COVID among the Asatidhah. The fact that we were able to get together and make quick decisions on many important and difficult issues, because Asatidhah, the Imams, were together, were united. Pew Research published a report this year on post-pandemic effect on national unity, and so on and so forth. You may Google it and find this on the net. One of the questions was how pandemic has affected national unity. So they studied 19 countries, and they asked, do you feel that the country is more united now than before COVID? So the most divided country out of that 19 country, I didn't say this, Pew Research said this, it's US. 80% of them said that they are more divided. Yeah. And ranked top on the list that we are more united now, post-COVID, alhamdulillah, Singapore. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. I don't need any information. I'm just sharing the data. So you Singaporeans don't get carried away. We still got a lot of work to do. So I'm just sharing data. Pardon me if I sound arrogant. Ya Allah, forgive me. I'm just simply sharing the data. Yeah. Simply because it is very important. And I've observed this among our religious leaders of that unity. But this we have invested through many years. And through our interfaith friends. There are many interfaith joint projects, which I don't have time really to talk about it. That's one. Secondly, to develop competency and leadership quality among the leaders. And this is not just the cognitive, the mental ability, but also all the other skills, drawing policies and so forth. And we really need to work fast, work hard to make that decisions. And thirdly, not finally, last but not least, is that constant engagement and communication. So during COVID, it did help that we had Zoom, so we could attend 2 meetings at one time, probably 3 meetings. My computer, my iPad, my iPhone. Okay. Well, I know it's not good. No, so we were able to communicate and engage. And we were able to engage with our members of our community more rigorously. And God knows, during that COVID, for some reason, and God knows the reason, we were facing very tough questions, decades of issue. For example, here in Singapore, I talk about the tudung, the issue of hijab. That has been around for decades. COVID, and then the LGBTQ, the repeal and so on and so forth. I do not know, they call this team of Muftiship, this team of Mufti and the 2 deputies as a COVID Mufti and the Tudung Mufti. But alhamdulillah, we were able to manage, and this is due to intense engagement and communication. Very tough. But I want to state that is key. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Hannan. Thank you very much. Okay, next, I would like to invite Reverend Dr. Edmund Fong, lecturer at the Trinity Theological College, Singapore. Reverend, please.
Thank you, Master Chung. Thank you, Dr. Hannan. It's indeed my privilege to be able to share this forum with us. Yep. Now, the scope of our breakout session this afternoon is really on the theme of faith overcoming the COVID-19 pandemic. looking at how our worship practices and rituals, and in my case, for the Christian church, how we had to change and adapt in response to the pandemic. In particular, we had to think about how of innovative ways to harness technology to ensure that we continue to maintain, like what Dr. Hannan has spoken about, the content of our faith. How we can continue to remain connected within a community. In other words, how do we continue worshiping together as a church despite not being able to congregate physically for a large part of the 2 years that we were in the core of the pandemic? So I will get to that, but first I want to begin with a broader overview and to recap the different ways in which the pandemic could have affected us and has affected us as individuals, families, communities, and as a society on the whole. And so one way to think about how the pandemic has affected all of us is by coming back to this very familiar psychological paradigm, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. In one sense, you could say that the pandemic affected all 5 levels of Maslow's hierarchy. Yeah? But I could also go on to say that in particular, for the majority of us Singaporeans, it probably hit us at the 2nd and the 3rd levels, hit us hardest at the 2nd and the 3rd levels, counting from the base. That is at the level of our safety needs and at the level of our love and belonging needs. And that's where I see the levels at which help and intervention was provided by both the government as well as our religious organizations. And as a general rule of thumb, we could say that the government probably came in more at the 2nd level, at the level of our safety needs, while the role that was played by religious organizations, like any other communities that we might find ourselves belonging in, came in more at the 3rd level, the level of love and belonging. Yep. So in terms of meeting safety needs, let me just recap for us. I think this is familiar to most of us, but just a reminder. The government actually drew a lot from its past reserves. So over the 3 financial years of 2020 to 2022, the government is expected to draw up to $42.9 billion in order to help to overcome the COVID-19 pandemic. And of course, the money was put to use in giving us cover and protection. So for example, the vaccines, the testing, the tracing, the clinical subsidies, the hospital treatments, and especially in providing us a buffer in enabling many of us to continue to secure our jobs under the job support scheme. So we, or at least myself as a citizen, really appreciate the government's provision and intervention in this regard. Yeah. And on this front of safety needs, while most of the provision came from the government, churches also came in to supplement the aid that was given by the government. So for example, I know of one church that had a fund, they call it the Emergency Relief Fund, where up to $1,000 a month could be given to help families that were affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. This is to ensure that people are able to secure their livelihood and at least be able to carry on with their safety needs. Yep. Churches also participated in contributing to this effort of meeting our safety needs in other ways. So for example, there were churches who came on board as partners in the Peers Network. Okay, and as shown there, Peers Network stands for Partners Engaging and Empowering Rough Sleepers. Yep. And so these churches provided safe, sound sleeping places for rough sleepers. And so thanks to the support of about 40 partners, the Peers Network actually supported over 1,000 rough sleepers during the COVID-19 pandemic by providing for them safe places where they can spend the night. Yep. Another major area in which churches came along to help out was really loving the migrant workers in our midst. Especially, I think, for those of us Singaporeans who recall, during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, before vaccination was introduced, this was in April 2020, infections were very, very high not so much among the wider community, but among the migrant workers community, hitting as many as 10,000 cases a day. And this was before vaccinations, and everybody was panicking, right? And here's where religious organizations came in to help with food and meal distributions. Such efforts have been coordinated by the Alliance of Guest Workers Outreach, AGWO, and they aim to deliver 20,000 packets of food a day. Yeah? And so together with the help of many churches, AGWO actually distributed more than 1 million meals and more than 1.2 million essential items to about 21,000 workers across more than 300 dormitories. Yeah. So I think this is just a recap for us, some of the ways in which we came alongside the government, even as the government provided majority of the intervention and the help that was needed at the safety needs level. Churches also came along together with other religious organizations to help in this area. In meeting with the love and belonging needs, churches had to carry on providing worship services, right? This is really the core of our life together as a church, our corporate worship of God. So we had to pivot around and try to adapt to the regulations and in order to carry on with our worship services. So for those of us that attend church, you remember all the way we started with the fully online Zoom service during the circuit breaker. Remember those days? Right. The singers would sing pre-recorded from their own homes. The pastor preaches from his own home. That was the one time that I could wear shorts and just put on my clergy shirt, and preach, because the camera never goes beyond the waist level, yeah? Right? You could do that, yeah. Right, so... and then after that, when things opened up slightly, key church personnel were allowed to go into church, and we were allowed to pre-record the service or live stream the service from church. So I remember those days, I went in and to preach in an empty hall. It's quite a unique experience. You look across and there's nobody there, and so there's just one point that you focus at, which is at the camera. Yeah. And then after that, churches were able to resume services with safe distancing and lower number of congregant members. And that was the first time that many of us had to register in order to attend services. Previously, we never had to do that. And of course, back in those days, there was no live singing then, right? And then moving on to churches resuming fuller numbers, but still requiring us to wear our mask. But the good news was that we could sing under our mask. Yeah? And all the way to just last weekend, where churches resumed full numbers and no more need for mask. Yeah? So that was really the journey that we had come along in. Other areas in which the church had to come in to carry on meeting the love and belonging needs. Many of our small groups, our Bible study groups, our youth groups, we carried on with the meetings online. Yeah. Then churches also came in to provide teaching sessions to help our congregant members process through some of the issues that they might be facing related to the COVID-19 pandemic. Some of these issues could be theological issues, like, for example, a very popular question that was raging around when the pandemic first started is the pandemic part of God's judgment upon us? Yeah, so we had to answer to that question, and there's a link there, and I participated in this podcast where we tried to answer some of these questions. Yeah. And then along the way, other ways in which the church came in to help was especially providing counseling services for many of our church members who, because of, they really felt isolated and they were not used to it. And we started to see a climb in terms of mental health issues, also breakdown in marriages and so forth, just because of the building tension of not being able to head outside. Yeah. And then at the same time, also the church came in, we encouraged, but we did not mandate that our congregant members be vaccinated. We strongly encouraged them, but we truly left it up to them. But many of the religious leaders, we ourselves set example by going for vaccination. Yeah. And also we made available educational material that was related to COVID-19. And most of these, some of these materials can be found on the Ethos Institute for Public Christianity, where we had some articles in there, like discussing whether the vaccines were safe to use, ethical to use in that sense. And we had some of those discussions. Another one, very popular one in there, was faith and science. How do we reconcile this? Yeah, does it mean that if I go for vaccination, I am relying less on God and my faith is reduced in any of those aspects? So we had some of those discussions, online. So I thought that instead of hearing from just me as a theologian in a college, we might like to hear from one of the pastors from the churches. So I've actually requested one of our pastors in the running one of the churches here in Singapore to share his experience of the COVID-19 pandemic. So I just refer you to the TV screens in front of you.
Dear friends, my name is Reverend Fong, and I'm the pastor in charge of Wesley Methodist Church. The COVID pandemic was truly a challenging time to keep the church together. And Wesley Methodist Church is a large church. We have about 7,500 members, and we had to adapt and change the way we are as a church, especially because of the pandemic. In my view, there are three key shifts or three key adaptations for the way we are as a church through the pandemic. Number one, it was the shift from the on-site to the online. Before COVID, Wesley only had activities that were catered for in-person on-site attendance. But because of the pandemic, we had to shift to the online digital platform. And so we were helping communities set up Zoom accounts and different online platforms in order they may connect together. This is quite a new way of doing ministry, yet we believe that through the digital platform, we were able to reach many, we were able to help many continue their faith in these very challenging times. Now, one progression we saw on the online service was to shift from a recording at a studio to a live stream service. We found that very helpful to help members connect to the church, because the fact that members can see, fellow members worshiping at a live service, or they can see pictures of the hall and the sanctuary, that really fosters a sense of remembrance and belonging. The second shift was from the impersonal to the personal. Why do I say that? Now, before COVID, Wesley had many touch points, but they were all impersonal touch points. For example, if you had feedback to give to a church, you would reach us through email. You would come to us through social media. But these are often what I would call impersonal touch points. But because of the pandemic, we felt that we had to move to a more personal touch to show care and concern. So for example, we launched what we call the Call to Care program. This is where we have call ambassadors that would call persons who are not in small groups, who are not serving, who probably would be in need of a support group. And so these are intentional touch points to call, to show care, to show concern. Definitely hearing a friendly voice over the phone, it's much more helpful than receiving an email. Other ways that we try to show or to put in place a personal touch point will be, for example, our prayer meetings. Now, our prayer meetings may be on Zoom, but after the prayer meeting is over, we have breakout rooms where people can meet not exactly face to face, but they can meet and share, and that's also another personal touch point which they can have access to. One other personal touch point would be through our pastoral letters. We wrote quite a number of pastoral letters to our congregation, and that would come from me as the pastor in charge. As I shared my heart on various issues facing us, I could give light on our government advisories, I could encourage unity, and these are ways where we could provide an open channel for people to meet, for people to give feedback, and this is what I call a shift from the impersonal to the personal. And finally, the last shift is a very important one. The last shift for us as a big church is actually to do less and to go deep. The pandemic has forced us to do much lesser than what we would have wanted. Because we couldn't have many activities, we had to rethink the way we are as a church. And I think the idea of going deep really resonated with us, where we didn't have so many activities, but for the activities that we had, we went deeper. We went deeper into forging deeper friendships, deeper spiritual communities that would really go deep in helping one another, face both the anxieties that we have and also have the courage to face the future ahead. And so these are the three key shifts, three ways we adapted for the COVID pandemic. Thank you for allowing me to share. May God bless you. Take care.
We should thank Reverend Raymond again for helping us with that video. So moving forward, how then do we move forward in this post-pandemic era that we are in? So firstly, I want to address the question of church attendance. And we ask, are church members coming back to physical church services now that services have resumed with conditions that by and large we can say are very similar to pre-COVID conditions? We don't actually have statistics for our Singapore churches yet. But I do hear of an ongoing effort to collect some of these statistics that is done between collaboration between seminaries as well as a major Christian publisher. And we're going to look at some of these statistics about how churches are post-pandemic. So we don't have any statistics yet, but according to surveys that are done by churches in the US, they have found the following patterns for church attendance. Okay, so if you can see there, in 2022, people have started to go back to church. And surprisingly, the greatest climb actually comes from the millennials. You would think that the millennials would be wanting to harness technology and stay at home, but you actually find them returning back to the churches. In fact, in a greater momentum than you would say perhaps the baby boomers or the Gen X, right? And here's another statistics for us. In terms of how are you primarily attending church today? This is done once again by the Barna Group for churches in the US. And you find that, for the millennials, it's split about half-half. About 50% attending physical services only, while the other 50% either online or a hybrid, a mixture of both. Okay, so these are some patterns that we have yet to observe for our Singapore churches, but I really look forward to the survey that will be done soon, hopefully. Another question to ask is how then do we move forward as church models, the ways of running church post-COVID? And here I mainly draw from the article that was found on the Salt and Light website, where the writer suggested 5 ways in which we can move forward as a church. So the first one is what we call the status quo church, that is on-site only by default. That means we return back to pre-COVID, simply returning back to a pre-COVID kind of situation. The upside of this is that we work with what we have. It does not tax our existing resources. And of course, the downside of it is that there's no way to engage those online, including members who might not be able to come on-site for on-site services. The second model is what they call the classical church. It's also on-site, but this is by deliberate choice. So the church leadership decides that moving forward, we will just stay to a physical on-site church service only. And once again, the upside of this is that there's a clear focus to help the church decide where to channel finite resources that we have. And of course, the downside of it is that are we letting go and missing out on this opportunity to harness on technology? The third model, which is the model that the writer of this article thinks that most churches will end up with, is what we call the hybrid church, both on-site as well as online. The upside of it is that there's something for everyone. And it allows the church to reach those beyond the church walls. Or, for example, those who might not be able to attend church over the weekends or on Sunday mornings itself. Okay. The downside, however, is that it can be very, very manpower and resource intensive. You probably need to set up a few teams and so forth. And there's always the ongoing debate that rages on. Does online church inevitably breed a kind of consumeristic, even lazy culture among Christians? I mean, the temptation, that you can wake up an hour later and just attend church online. It's always there, in that sense. So these are some of the questions that we have to wrestle with. The fourth model is what they call the innovating church, on-site with specialized online vehicles. Now, you might be wondering what's the difference between model number 4 and model number 3, okay? And I think the key difference is this: an innovating church creates entirely new digital versions of their existing events. So, for example, an innovating church might choose not to live stream its ongoing physical service. Instead, it may choose to set up an entirely new digital worship service, operating under very different parameters. For example, does it have to be on a Sunday morning? How long should an online service be, in order to capture the attention of those attending the service? Does worship have to come before the word? How will you administer the sacrament of the Holy Communion, for example? I mean, these are all questions that the innovating church, in wanting to set up a specialized digital service, worship service, will have to wrestle with. Yeah, and of course, the innovating church functions really in startup mode, and it's just like many startups, internet startups. There must be a threshold for failure. So church leaders must be willing to take the risk, and in order to embark on some of these new projects and innovative ways of doing church. Yeah, and of course, the last model is the digital frontier church, where this is purely an online church service only. The upside of it is that it starts on a clean slate, caters to those who are unable to attend on-site services for reasons of mobility and so forth. The downside is that it lacks the physical touch, and they will still need to adapt when an in-person gathering is required. And they must be careful not to attract those from other churches who are unwilling to go back to their own church for the physical services. Yeah, just in case some of us think that this is actually quite a far-out proposal, it's actually much closer to home. Because the one thing that I've come to discover is that for many pastors of smaller churches, and very often pre-pandemic, these smaller churches would often rent out a factory space in a factory building that they use over the weekends in order to congregate together for their services. Many of these pastors found that during the COVID-19 pandemic, they still had to pay the rent for the factory space. And they realized that going online was such a viable option. And so many of them have not continued to rent out the spaces, and instead they have moved to a purely online kind of platform for meeting up with their congregant members. Yep. Except that the only twist maybe is that out of every month, one weekend will still be a physical meeting where they'll rent a ballroom space and they still gather together for some physical fellowship. But by and large, it's online. So I think that's the 5 ways and 5 models in which the church can continue to think about how to move forward post-pandemic. Yeah. So I thank you for listening, and I hope that you have found this helpful. And I look forward to the discussion that we will have. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Reverend. Okay, now to the role of a Taoist priest, now Tai Chi. Okay, you can ask us questions, and I will direct it to the panel. And also, we may also invite speakers, okay, our friends on the floor, okay, to share with us too. Okay, but before that, maybe have a show of hands. How many of us here, okay, prefer attending a virtual religious service than a physical one? Have a show of hands. Okay, if you prefer to go online for religious service, maybe have a show of hands.
I'm divided.
Divided, okay. Okay. Okay, we'll invite you to share later. Okay, so the rest would prefer something that's in person. Show of hands. Okay, that's great. Question. Okay, so I think during this pandemic, since we say overcoming the pandemic, so do we see a lot of change, like what both speakers have mentioned earlier? There's a lot of adaptability. Okay, we have to adapt to new practices and new innovations along the way. For example, okay, I would just want to share one. Okay, we have a friend here, okay, who is not very active, okay, on social media before pandemic, but recently his Facebook page actually was created, I think just before pandemic hit us, right, in 2020. January, I just checked yesterday. Yeah, so you have 1,300 followers following his Facebook page. So you see that religious leaders, and many of them have been going online. The presence is very, very, you can see his, posting and sharing of his activities, his thoughts and reflections every day. So maybe we can invite our speakers to share a bit, what is one major change that you see, a shift from pre-pandemic to now, after pandemic, what is one thing that you would like to, is there one learning point that you would like to share with us?
I think for me personally, it would be learning how to socialize again. I'm not too sure about you, but for many of us, returning back to the workplaces, returning back to our communities, and so forth, that has been exciting, but yet also at the same time, it's been a little bit tiring. Yeah, and I think the main reason is because we have had to learn how to socialize again. And especially now, it's made a little bit easier now that we don't have to wear our mask. Previously, when we still had to wear our mask, the only way that I could tell how you're reacting to me was through the eyes, and that's only as far as we can go. Yeah. So I find that that's something which, personally, I'm still learning to adapt. And here I would just like to echo Reverend Raymond's words, where perhaps a major lesson that we can learn is how to do less, but go deep, in terms of the activities that we have,
Protecting our private space. If and when this happens again, how then we protect our private space? By which I mean, I think during COVID, my private space was compromised. Meaning, it's work from home, everything at home, all the meetings, early morning to late night, and all the children doing work from home. Home used to be my private space, my sanctuary. I don't usually bring works back home. I do not mind stay back in the office late. My routine is 7:30 in the morning in the office already. The earliest I go back probably 7:30. I will not bring home. I do not bring home my computers. Although unfortunately I have the handphone, so people can still text. That was pre-COVID. During COVID, you can imagine the household. And I've got many children. I do not want to tell you how many children I have. So work from home, and my wife is also equally very active in the society, in the community. She too sits in many committees. And I just don't know where is my private space. Even at bed. Meeting. While I was able to adapt and console myself, but I'm also concerned for the children. Yeah. So to me, that was one really personal thing. And I want to make sure that my children also enjoy their private spaces. Now that we are able to go out, but again, we must anticipate things like this would happen again. So how do I prepare myself, my community, my family, for such incident again? I've got no answer yet. Need to think of technologies and ways to deal with this, and we need to train ourselves how to deal with such a situation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Perhaps I will open the floor. For questions to our panel. Hi, sir. Yeah. Yeah, the mic is coming to you. Yeah.
Hi, thank you very much for being here in this panel. My name is Amr Hussain. I'm a physician from Washington, D.C. in the United States. My question is actually for anybody. It's tough to kind of design new guidelines when, if the virus is evolving, we don't really know how to safely do services or anything. So I'm curious what suggestions you have for health leaders or doctors in engaging with religious communities and developing some of the safe practices.
During this period, misinformation, disinformation was really a challenge. We must make sure that we get credible, verified, the right information. And with the social media, we've got lots of information, not to mention conspiracy theories and so on and so forth. So I think it's very important for us to work very closely with, as we speak about COVID in particular, with scientists in the lab, doctors, health, and you need to, again, as mentioned earlier, the engagement and communication. So at our end, we do that regularly. So we've got a group of scientists, Muslim scientists in the lab who always advise and we check. And even if we say inaccurate information, then these guys will text me, Hannan, it's not exactly so. So we really need experts in doctors in the medical professional sector and others to really guide us. And I think we need to open the communication line between all people of the different domains, different experts. Thank you.
Yeah, I think this presupposes a close relationship between the government as well as the religious organizations. And I think in Singapore, we're very fortunate to have built up that kind of closeness in the relationship even before the pandemic hit us. So the churches were able to see that the pandemic as a public health issue. So because it's a public health issue, it concerns public health risk. Measures need to be taken, and so we were very happy to take the guidance from the government authorities, in particular MCCY. So MCCY will be sending us newsletters that will tell us of restrictions as well as the loosening up of many of the measures. And I think that was a perfect example of how many of the church pastors work together in line with the government authorities on that. Yeah.
Okay, is there any other gentleman over here?
Hello everybody, my name is Gurmukh Singh. I hail from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, very, very far away. No, just across the causeway. I'm an advocate and solicitor, I'm a lawyer back home. But I also represent the Malaysian Sikh National Youth Organization, although I don't look very youthful myself. Thank you very much to our wonderful speakers, Tuan Hannan and Reverend. My major take-home points from your presentation was that Tuan Hannan does his meetings in the bathroom and Reverend does his services in his shorts. Sorry, a little bit naughty of me. When COVID-19 initially hit all of us, in Malaysia we had very, very stringent movement control orders. It was like a curfew. We could not even step out. We could only step out to get essentials or avail ourselves to health services. And I believe it was similar here in Singapore with the circuit breakers. And at that time, we were denied, we could not go to temple. I could not go to the Gurdwara. And my fellow Christian brothers and Hindu and Muslim brothers and sisters could not go to their houses of worship. It was said by many that this was designed by God, and God is saying, leave my houses of worship alone, go back home. You want to search me, you search me within yourselves, because that is where I primarily reside anyway. Sorry, I'm going to come to the question very soon. I don't mean to start a discourse. So during this very, very stringent movement control order and circuit breaker period, I think the benefit was also that there was a complete cessation, a complete stopping in its tracks of all sorts of corrupt practices and transactions. So there was some good, because people could not do their business, and this stopped in its track the negative elements and all that. Now the question is this to our honorable panelists. Would you agree that in light of that, COVID was a blessing to humanity, and now that we are coming out of it, we may never see such a period of blessing again? Because this was the time where Sikhs were concerned, we were all engaged in prayer, and I'm sure it was the same with all other faiths, and we were pleading to God to have mercy on the entire creation, and not just for our families, not just for ourselves, for the entire humanity. And this was a collective global prayer. So nothing is as beautiful as that. Would you agree that this intense COVID-19 period was a period of enhanced, worldwide, global humanitarianism and spirituality, which probably will not come again. Thank you.
Reverend?
I think there are definitely lessons for us to learn, lessons for us as the church, and as well as for the other religious organizations. There definitely are lessons for us to learn, and yeah, at least for the church, we shouldn't be in such a hurry to resume back to pre-COVID activities and everything, that we miss out on the lessons that God wants us to learn. But I really don't think it is in the church's place to pronounce these lessons as either judgment or blessing. It may be the personal Christian, it may be the personal pastor's take on the issue, and I've spoken to fellow Christians who really say that this is really judgment from God, and they are very, very strongly convicted of it, yeah. But I don't think we have any scriptural reference points to be able to decisively say, as for example, the church in Singapore, that this is judgment from God or this is a blessing from God. Yeah. So that's where I'll view it. But definitely there are lessons that we can learn. And I think we should take time to reflect and take stock of some of these lessons.
In everything that happens, there are blessings. It just matter how intense, more intense, less intense, and so forth. Even in our personal life, something that happens before, something that befalls on us. So truly the lessons, blessing to everything. COVID was a big one at national, at humanity level. But personally, you all have those crises and there are blessings to it. Even if this is judgment by God, even if this end of times, so what? The question is not whether this is judgment of God or not, but what does it mean? And that itself is a blessing. That itself is a wake-up call. So I personally will not spend time arguing about whether it's end times or not, because my end of time is not really COVID. My end time is when I sleep, when I wake up. That is really our personal end time. So, and therefore, asking the right question, now, even if this is end of times, now, even if this is God's judgment, so what? What are the blessings? Because God does not do anything without purpose. God is always purposeful. And there are blessings, there are purposes to all this. So that is a question that we need to ask ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, is there any other question? Yeah, gentleman here. Okay, we'll come to you next, sir.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Mohammad Salman Sakili from Zamboanga in the Philippines, southern part of the Philippines. The religious sector, or the Singapore religious sector approaches to its own respective communities had manifested definitely on its effectiveness in your engagement with your own respective communities, partly perhaps due to the good relationship with the government. And we're trying to emulate that back at home in the Philippines, in southern part, in Mindanao, because the image before, seldom you can never see an image of the ulama and other faith-based organization and the local government unit and other security sector sitting together. But now we are doing so. Now, my question, sir, Sheikh, is that we sometimes receive several comments from our elders and from different communities that the religious sector had become politicized or being dictated by the government, so much so that all the fatwa coming out is, referred to, this is because of the governments wanting to close all the masjid, and so the ulama are trying to close the masjid. So my question is, how did you face the same struggles in all faith? And if so, how did you deal with such issues? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Can I ask, before I forget the response, I think that's very important. I thought one important thing, and I mentioned that in my presentation, is sowing the seeds of trust and mutual trust. And what you are doing today is not, the harvest is not today, but generations to come. So while in sowing this trust between the ulamas, and this is a long process, it's a long process. You may not be able to see the fruit during our generation, but actually we are planting the seeds for generations to come. And where we are today, if I can say this in Singapore, where we are today is not what we did, but it's really what our past generations have done decades ago. And we are reaping the fruit. So I want to assure you, I'm not unfamiliar with South Africa. I've got plenty of friends over there. I've been there a couple of times, so I know the challenges. But if I can, if it's a brotherly sharing, it's do not despair, do not give up, because we are actually planting the seeds not for our time, but the future. And this is where the mutual trust between us, among the ulamas, as well as the ulama and the state. Now, whatever that you say about those mistrust, distrust, it's become a music to us. About this, all the conspiracy, end of times, people are doing that, and so forth. Especially in my position as a public officer, that makes it even difficult for Mufti and us, right? We are the dogs of the government, and so on. I mean, all namings, callings, we are just used to it. But if you ask those who are not in the public office, like we've got plenty of them here, these are Sadisa, yeah? They don't do that because of the state. Our fatwa, just very briefly, our fatwa comprises of, Mufti does not issue fatwa, by the way. The Mufti here in Singapore does not issue fatwa. The one who issues fatwa is the fatwa committee. The Mufti chairs the fatwa committee. Okay? And then the fatwa must be by consensus. So all our fatwas are ijma, consensus. All members of fatwa must agree on that fatwa. If there's any single member who disagree, you can issue a fatwa. And these members, they are not public officers. They are not government officers. They are not public officers. They are independent asatizahs. So the fatwas are not by the government, nor by the public officers, but these are by independent asatizah. So let's take that as blessings, opportunity for you to be, as it says, when going gets tough, the tough gets going. Thank you.
I think we've heard this many times, but it's always been reinforced to us that Singapore is a secular state, but a religious society, and a very religiously diverse, and if I can add to that, a society in which religion can flourish, and you can say that. And the reason why religion has been able to flourish in Singapore is because of the church-state separation that has always been maintained. So in that sense, that is where, from the government's perspective, the government must always not try to politicize religion, or at least Christianity, here in Singapore. But from the church's perspective, we must also not try to Christianize politics. And it is only in such an environment that I really believe that the relationships can be maintained, they can be grown, they can be developed, and that religions can really flourish in Singapore itself. So I mean, I just refer us back to the video that was shown on the first opening day of ICCS, where in the video, I think one of the speakers in the video said that it's only in Singapore that you can walk down the street and you find a temple next to a mosque, next to a church. You can't really find that very often in many of the other city-states around us. And so I think that is testimony, and that bears witness to the flourishing of religions that we've been able to have in Singapore. But my point is that only happens because we respect this principle of church-state separation.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the gentleman over there.
Thank you very much for the panel. Your brother and Faith and Creation, Safed Katovic from the United States. I'm just curious to know, we had a different process through the Muslim community in the United States in terms of reaching consensus and then closing of the mosque, etc. It's a much obviously larger community and spread out differently. But I want to know specifically with regard to Khutbatul Jummah, the Friday services, and Salatul Jummah, how did that play itself out with regard to the lockdown of the masjids? Did you carry that out in some format or not? And the question to my Christian brother, and I don't know, I'm sorry, forgive my ignorance enough, but what I know from my studies in the university and my friends was that part of the ritual or the sacrament is the distribution of the host. How did that take place in a virtual world? And then the follow-up to that is, how is that continuing after the fact? I mean, for example, virtual after the fact in terms of participation of congregations. Obviously, if you go virtually online, a lot more people can have access to things than if things were in person. So how did that change the dynamics of your congregation in terms of numbers or not before and after? Thank you.
An example of these are rituals that we do daily, and but we maintain the principles and spirit of Jummah. So the observance of the Jummah, the Friday prayer, by the way, went through different phases. Sometime in April, I mentioned that we had to make the decision to suspend, probably not close, suspend the mosque and the Jummah prayer. And that went through about, I've got my mosque chairman, my leaders here, the closure for 9 months, thereabout. So closure of mosque, so you're unable to perform your Friday prayer, nor for your service and so on. So it was closed for 9 months. So all the classes was held online. Yeah, and then gradually, as situation improves, gradually there's a safe gradual return to the mosque. So we allow return to the mosque, but very limited number. So we started with 50 packs per mosque. And then we perform the Friday prayer, that 50, and you observe the 1 meter safe distancing, and then you need to book. So the booking of for Friday prayer, then even when you want to go on daily, you still need to book. So I showed just now the apps, and then they decide where you do the booking. So you need to book, and it is a limited space, 50. And then gradually increase slowly. You must be vaccinated, obviously, and so on and so forth. So recently, it's almost, and then we started to allow the shoulder to shoulder where the soft you bring together, but still the number was limited. I remember in all these occasions when we first had our first Friday prayer after 9 months of closure, and I was the imam, I was the khatib, and delivering the khutbah, and I remember it was a huge mosque, one of the bigger mosques here in Singapore, and then to see just a few people in front of you, it was so touching. So even I forgot my khutbah text. And then alhamdulillah, after that, I also had the opportunity for the first Friday prayer where we got to return to the soft. And again, I was at the pulpit, at the minbar, and I decided to change the khutbah instead, because the sight of the. So we took a safe return to the mosque, and alhamdulillah, now it's almost like pre-COVID, but still, for the Friday prayer you need to book, especially the bigger mosque, because this is one interesting point. We have been handling this case pre-COVID, how to address the overflow of the crowd, Jama'ah. It went out to the streets, in front of the toilets. Safety is not safe. To have double sessions or triple sessions were unthought of before this. But COVID has provided that opportunity. And so we want to keep that. How do we keep the mosque safe? So for the bigger mosques, they still need to do, when they have 2 sessions, they need to do booking, so we can control the crowd. Yeah. So, and it's almost there, it's almost pre-COVID. But the bigger question we ask is, should we return to the pre-COVID? What are the lessons that we learned, and we take this opportunity actually to organize ourselves to better perform our prayer? Before COVID, you park your car anywhere, causing danger, harm to others. Double parking, triple parking. During the COVID, alhamdulillah, we didn't observe that. Are we going back to such practices? So that's a big question that we need to ask ourselves. How do we keep this spirit and also lessons from the COVID? Thank you, sir. For detail, probably you can talk with, we got some friends here from the mosque, we can talk about it.
Yeah, okay. Maybe, Reverend, you can run out in 1 minute.
I can try. Yeah. So for Protestant Christians, it's always been a core distinct belief that where you find the preaching of the word and the celebration of the sacraments, there you find a true church. This has always been one of the major beliefs of Protestant churches. So in terms of the celebration of the Lord's Supper, the sacrament of the Lord's Supper, or Holy Communion as we call it, we really allowed the different denominations to have internal discussions as to whether for example, their denominational teachings and their beliefs would allow them to conduct the Holy Communion online, for example. And here, there were differences in views. So some denominations, because of the way that they understand the sacramental symbolism behind the Lord's Supper, they did not feel comfortable doing the Holy Communion online. While some other churches, because of the different way in which they understand the sacramental symbolism that's brought out in the Lord's Supper, allowed for Holy Communion to be conducted online. And here was where I think we could practice charity among the different denominations and not end up judging one another just simply because our views on this matter differ. Yeah, on that.
Thank you very much. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us at this breakout session.